An arrogant billionaire who never loses, accepts a cruel bet to marry an obese woman for 6 months, thinking it's just another game he'll win. But she's no pushover. She challenges his ego, breaks his shallow rules, and turns his world upside down. What begins as a heartless wager soon becomes the deepest lesson of his life, a twisted game that may cost him the one thing money can't buy. Hey, everyone! Before we dive into Fredrick's story, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to our channel, True and Twisted Stories. That way, you won't miss any of our powerful, heart-gripping tales. Now, let's get back to the story. Fredrick Spoon was a billionaire playboy with designer charm and a ruthless edge, used to having the upper hand in business, in life, and in love. Fredrick was used to sleek deals and even sleeker women, model thin, polished, submissive. The kind who whispered yes before he even finished asking. Winning was second nature to him, and nothing thrilled him more than a challenge. So, when his longtime friend Harry made a provocative offer at a glittering New York party, Fredrick's interest was instantly piqued. $1 million, Harry said, smirking. Marry a woman completely opposite your usual taste.
Someone big.
Someone real. And stay married for 6 months. That's all. Fredrick laughed. You think a woman's size can scare me? I'll marry whoever you pick, and I'll win. Like always. The combination of competition and money was too tempting to resist. Without much thought, Fredrick agreed. He didn't know the woman in question, but he saw it as just another deal to conquer. He signed the contract that night, cocky, buzzed, sure it would be nothing more than an amusing detour. He had no idea what he was walking into. Her name was Sandra Richards, a woman who didn't conform to conventional beauty standards. But what truly intrigued Fredrick was what he later learned. Sandra was confident, fiercely independent, and strong-willed. Unlike the women he was used to, she wouldn't be easily impressed or controlled. And that, oddly enough, excited him. The day of the meeting, it was a private dinner at an upscale restaurant reserved just for them. Fredrick arrived first, perfectly tailored in Armani, leaning back with that arrogant smile he wore like armor. Then she walked in, and the air shifted. Sandra Richards. Fredrick's smirk faltered.
She was big.
Boldly, unapologetically big. Thick thighs, wide hips, no effort to hide any of it. She wore a navy blue mesh gown that clung to every curve like she wanted him to see it. And she walked, not with shame, but power. Her heels clicked like gunshots against marble. Fredrick blinked, stunned for the first time in years. He actually felt embarrassed. Eyes from across the room turned, and his pride twisted in discomfort. This couldn't be the woman Harry picked. He muttered. She didn't just break the mold, she shattered it. She wasn't fazed by the opulence of the place, or by him. She met his gaze head-on with quiet confidence. Sandra reached the table, looked him squarely in the eyes. You must be Fredrick Spoon, Sandra said, taking her seat. And you must be Sandra Richards, he replied, offering his hand with a polite smile. She shook it firmly, pausing just long enough to show she wasn't there to play games. Let's not waste time, she said directly. I know about the bet, the terms, and why we're here. So, let's skip the fake smiles. I'm not one of your skinny conquests. You don't intimidate me, and you won't change me. Fredrick raised an eyebrow, masking the chill running down his spine. He was surprised by her directness, but didn't let it show. And yet, you still agreed to this marriage? He asked, genuinely intrigued. Sandra's eyes held steady. Let's just say I have my reasons. I'm not naive, Fredrick. 6 months might seem short, but it's long enough for things to get complicated. If you think you can control me, you're mistaken. That made Fredrick smile. She was a challenge, and he hadn't expected that. Most people played by his rules. Sandra clearly wouldn't. By the end of their dinner, Fredrick was more than intrigued. He was captivated. There was something refreshing about her honesty, her refusal to be intimidated. He couldn't stop thinking about her. A few days later, they met again, this time at a modest little cafe Sandra had picked. It was a far cry from Fredrick's usual upscale haunts, but he agreed without hesitation. He was curious. Who was this woman who had so confidently agreed to a temporary marriage? When he arrived, Sandra was already seated, sipping tea. She smiled as he approached, warmer than before, but still self-assured. "I thought you preferred five-star restaurants," she teased as he sat down. "Sometimes it's good to break routine," Fredrick replied, trying to sound casual, though he felt slightly off balance in the unfamiliar setting. They exchanged small talk for a while, but Sandra, true to form, got straight to the point. "If we're doing this, let me be clear," she said, setting her cup down. "I'm not in this for your money or lifestyle. 6 months is 6 months. When it's over, I'll walk away the same woman I am today." Fredrick studied her carefully. He believed her. Sandra wasn't like the women who saw marriage to him as a ticket to something better. She didn't need him. "So, what do you want, Sandra?" he asked. "Freedom," she answered, without hesitation. "Even in this arrangement, I won't be controlled. I have my own life, and that won't change just because of a ring." Fredrick didn't expect her honesty to disarm him, but it did. He respected it. After all, this was just business to him, a challenge. If she wanted independence, so be it. "Fine," he agreed. 6 months. After that, we go our separate ways." Sandra watched Fredrick for a long moment, as if wanting to be absolutely certain he truly agreed to the terms. She had accepted this challenge with a plan in mind and was determined to see it through on her terms. Deep down, she knew Fredrick might try to manipulate the situation. He was that type of man, but she trusted her own strength to resist. The meeting ended cordially, each of them clear on their roles. Sandra would retain her independence, and Fredrick would treat the marriage as nothing more than a formality. But as the days passed and the wedding date drew closer, Fredrick Spoon began to sense that maybe this game wasn't going to be as straightforward as he had imagined. The wedding itself was cold and impersonal, more of a strategic contract than a celebration of love. Fredrick, with his calculating mindset, already saw himself as the winner. He was convinced the 6 months would fly by, and that Sandra, no matter how headstrong, would eventually give in to the lavish lifestyle he was ready to shower upon her. Immediately after the ceremony, he took her to his massive penthouse in the heart of New York, a gleaming monument to his wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows bathed the space in city lights, and every inch of the home boasted exclusivity and opulence. To Fredrick, this was the real battleground. Here, he would win her over, not with affection, but with excess. But from the moment Sandra stepped into the penthouse, her demeanor remained distant. She didn't look around with awe or admiration. Her gaze was steady, almost defiant. 6 months, Fredrick. Not a day more, she said firmly, walking over to one of the enormous windows and gazing out at the skyline, entirely unimpressed by her surroundings. Fredrick smiled. He was used to this kind of resistance. Every woman before had eventually surrendered to his charm and his riches. Sandra would be no different, or so he thought. In the first days after the wedding, he tried everything to impress her: expensive jewelry, designer outfits, invitations to exclusive getaways. He expected her to eventually melt into the lifestyle he dictated. But she refused it all. "I don't need these things, Fredrick," Sandra would say calmly, her voice like still water that somehow shook him more than anger ever could. It frustrated him deeply. Fredrick, who had always been able to get whatever and whoever he wanted, found himself facing someone who wouldn't bend, not to his wealth, not to his world. It wasn't just about the bed anymore. Now it was personal. He needed to break her resistance. He needed to win. That's when his approach turned darker. He stopped her from going to work, offering dismissive reasons like, "You don't need a paycheck anymore," or "Your role now is my wife." When she insisted, he'd manipulate her schedule, making her wait hours for meetings, canceling appointments she cared about. He rearranged her world to keep control. But Sandra wouldn't yield. She stood her ground, immovable, and that only fueled Fredrick's obsession. Their relationship became a minefield, full of tension, sharp words, and subtle power plays. Even trivial conversations became battlegrounds. Yet in every clash, Sandra outmaneuvered him with calm clarity, cutting through his attempts to undermine her. One particularly tense night, Fredrick tried a more emotional approach. "I don't understand you, Sandra," he said, watching her with a mix of frustration and disbelief. "Any other woman would be thrilled to live like this. But you act like none of it matters. What do you really want?" Sandra, quiet until then, lifted her eyes, sharp and bright with conviction. "What do I want? Respect, Fredrick. I'm not a pawn in your game. You think money buys everything, but it doesn't buy dignity. It doesn't buy integrity. You surround yourself with all this luxury, but you're hollow inside, and that's what you can't stand." Her words struck him like a slap. For the first time, Fredrick felt something crack inside. She wasn't just resisting him, she was stripping away the armor he had spent years building. And it terrified him. No one had ever challenged him like this. No one had ever seen through him. But instead of backing off, Fredrick doubled down. He started crafting plans to isolate her completely. He cut off her professional contacts, blocked opportunities that might advance her career, and even sabotaged events she was organizing. He wanted to make her dependent, to prove she needed him more than she realized. But Sandra refused to break. Each blow she endured only seemed to make her stronger. She stood taller, fiercer, more determined. And then one night, she made her move. "You think you're in control, don't you?" she said, her tone cool and deliberate. "But you have no idea. I have a plan too, Fredrick. And when the time comes, you'll realize this game isn't what you thought. It's bigger, much bigger." Fredrick stared at her, stunned. For the first time, he realized he might have underestimated her. And for the first time, he felt fear that he wasn't the one steering the outcome. The weeks that followed felt like walking a tightrope, each day more fragile than the last. Fredrick, desperate to regain control, tried everything, every manipulation, every calculated gesture. But Sandra remained steady, unshaken. Her resistance was relentless, a fortress he couldn't breach. But something else began to change too, something Fredrick couldn't deny. In his efforts to dominate her, he had started to see her. Really see her. And what he saw wasn't someone to be conquered. It was someone he might actually respect, and it wasn't just about respecting Sandra's resilience. There was something deeper. She was doing something no other woman had ever done. She was disarming Fredrick Spoon emotionally, and that unsettled him. For the first time, he found himself thinking of her not as part of a bet or an opponent, but as someone he genuinely wanted to understand. One night, after a heated argument, Fredrick found himself alone in the expansive living room of his penthouse, staring out through the towering glass windows. The city lights, which once gave him a sense of power and dominance, now felt cold and empty. He asked himself why he was feeling this way. Sandra was supposed to be just a woman he married for 6 months, a pawn in a game. Nothing more. But the truth was different. She was stirring something deep within him. The man who had always prided himself on emotional control was now unraveling. Sandra could see through his facade, and that vulnerability scared him. As Fredrick wrestled with his thoughts, Sandra moved through their shared space with quiet purpose. She seemed more distant each day, almost as if she were waiting for what he didn't know. There was an invisible wall between them, something he couldn't break through, and it tormented him. He couldn't tell if it was pride or fear of losing control, but something about Sandra kept drawing him in. "You're different," said Harry, Fredrick's longtime friend and the one who proposed the bet during a casual dinner. "Normally, you'd have everything under control by now. But it seems like this woman's challenging you in a way no one else has." Fredrick gave a forced smile. He didn't respond immediately. He hated to admit it, but Harry was right. Something had changed. That night, Fredrick came home determined to settle things. He needed to get Sandra out of his head, remind himself this was a contract, nothing more. When he walked into the penthouse, he found her on the couch, reading a book, completely unaware of his presence. "Can we talk?" Fredrick asked, breaking the silence that had become routine between them. Sandra looked up, calmly closed her book, and gazed at him with a serene but focused expression. Of course, she said, as if she'd been expecting it. Fredrick sat across from her, searching for the right words. The air was thick with tension. He could no longer treat this marriage like a business transaction. Something had shifted, and he had to confront it. "What are we doing here, Sandra?" he asked, surprising even himself with the sincerity in his voice. "This started as a game, a bet. But I don't know what to think anymore." Sandra held his gaze for a moment before responding. "I'm not playing, Fredrick. I never was." Her voice was calm, but filled with weight. "From the beginning, I accepted this marriage for reasons beyond you. I don't care about your money or control. I'm here for something more. And if you haven't figured that out by now, maybe it's time you opened your eyes." A tightness gripped Fredrick's chest. It was as if she was revealing a truth he couldn't yet comprehend. Frustration bubbled to the surface. "I know you have your secrets, Sandra. But what infuriates me is, the more I try to understand you, the more I realize I'm not in control, and I hate that." He suddenly stood, unable to stay still under the weight of the realization. Sandra rose slowly, walking toward him. She stopped just inches away. Fredrick's heartbeat thundered in his ears. "Fredrick," she said softly, "this isn't about control. You've lived your life trying to dominate everything and everyone. But with me, you'll have to learn that control isn't always the answer. Some things just are." He looked into her eyes, and for a fleeting moment, it was as if he truly saw her, not as a piece in his game, but as a real person. "So, what do you want?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. Sandra smiled, a subtle, mysterious smile that sent a shiver down his spine. "I want you to figure that out for yourself," she said. Then she turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone with his thoughts. In the days that followed, the emotional distance between them seemed to widen, yet Fredrick felt more connected to Sandra than ever. He became obsessed with understanding her. What was she hiding? What did she truly want? He didn't want to admit it, but Sandra was changing him. She was shifting how he saw the world, and that terrified him. The 6 months of marriage were nearly over, but for Fredrick Spoon, each day dragged like an eternity. He could barely sleep. He felt like he was on the verge of discovering something monumental, something that made his stomach turn. Sandra had become an enigma. No longer just a woman he married on a dare, she was someone who seemed to carry a truth he couldn't grasp. The obsession to understand her consumed him. Fredrick had tried everything to uncover the mystery Sandra held. He hired private investigators, dug into her past, followed every lead, but everything led to dead ends. It was as if Sandra had orchestrated everything perfectly, staying 2 steps ahead. One night, after a business meeting, Fredrick returned home late. He saw the balcony light on. There she was, Sandra, seated, looking out over New York like a queen surveying her empire. He felt the weight of the moment. He knew tonight she would tell him the truth. But fear knotted his throat. He approached slowly, his footsteps echoing in the silence. She didn't turn around. The air was heavy, filled with unspoken tension. "I need answers, Sandra," he said, voice steady but heart pounding. "I can't take this anymore. You have to tell me the truth." Sandra exhaled and rose from her chair, finally facing him. Her eyes, usually calm and unreadable, now burned with an emotion he couldn't place, something fierce and dark. "The truth," she repeated, crossing her arms. A bitter smile touched her lips. "Do you really want it, Fredrick?" He nodded without hesitation, even as dread grew in his chest. "You have no idea who I am," she began, her voice icy. "You've always seen people as pawns in your game. But this time, you were the pawn. I've been playing this from the start." A chill raced down Fredrick's spine. His sense of control, his confidence was unraveling. And she was the one holding the strings all along. He tried to speak, but Sandra didn't let him. "Do you remember the name Richards?" she continued, her voice growing sharper. "Of course you don't. People like you never remember." Fredrick Spoon stepped back, his eyes wide, his mind racing to make sense of her words. "My father owned a small company," Sandra said, her voice filled with pain. "He struggled every day just to keep it afloat, until you came along and destroyed it." Fredrick's heart pounded. What are you talking about? He stammered, confused. Sandra took a step closer, her eyes blazing with a fury he hadn't seen before. My father, Fredrick. He was an honest man trying to support his family. But then you came with your empire and wiped out everything he worked for. He lost his business and then he lost himself. Her voice broke slightly, tears welling up in her eyes. He killed himself, Fredrick. Because of you. Because of your ruthless climb to the top. Your success cost my family everything. Her words struck Fredrick like a punch to the chest. He stood frozen, memories surfacing, deals, acquisitions, mergers. So many faces, so many names, forgotten in his quest for dominance. He had never stopped to consider the destruction left in his wake. Sandra, he tried to interrupt, desperate. But she raised her hand sharply.
No.
Her voice thundered now, her anger boiling over. You have no idea what you've done. This was never about the money. You stole my father. The only person I had in the world. While you lived in penthouses and drank champagne, my mother and I fell into debt and despair. We barely had food to eat while you bathed in luxury. Fredrick was stunned, completely disarmed. He opened his mouth, trying to explain, to defend himself, but nothing came out. I planned everything, Sandra continued, her tone steadier now, but laced with cold resentment. When I heard about your bet, I knew this was my chance. I approached you. I agreed to marry you because I wanted you to feel what it's like to be used, to be manipulated, to feel powerless. Fredrick trembled. He had always been the one in control, the master of the game. But now he realized, with sickening clarity, he had become the pawn. Sandra, he whispered. You never knew, she cut in, stepping close until she was face to face with him. You never cared enough to know. You tore through people's lives like they were obstacles. But now I'm here, not to destroy you, but to make sure you never forget. Her voice softened just enough to twist the knife deeper. I want you to live with the pain. The same pain you caused me. And that pain, Fredrick, will haunt you for the rest of your life. Her words echoed in the silent room like a final verdict. Fredrick had never felt such weight, such irreversible consequence. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the one holding the power. He had lost more than a bet, more than a game. He had lost something he could never get back. Sandra turned and walked away. The sound of her footsteps faded, leaving a hollow silence behind. Fredrick collapsed onto the couch, breathless, stunned. The room felt too large now, too empty. Her revelation crashed through his mind like a relentless storm, tearing down every illusion he had built about himself. The woman he had thought of as just a means to an end, someone he could charm, manipulate, and discard, had shattered his entire world. He didn't even know how to react. Sandra didn't give him the chance. After that night, she ignored him completely. She became a ghost in his life, present but unreachable. She walked past him in silence, her eyes never meeting his. At breakfast, she sat quietly, refusing to acknowledge his existence. Fredrick, once the center of every room, found himself invisible in his own home. The silence was unbearable. Sandra still spoke to the staff, handled her affairs, and lived her life. But to Fredrick, it was as if he didn't exist. The stillness between them grew louder with every passing day, until it was all he could hear. One morning, as she prepared to leave, he finally broke. Sandra, he called softly. We need to talk. She froze, her back to him, adjusting her coat. The air between them thickened. Fredrick waited, hoping, dreading. But she said nothing. She simply opened the door and walked out, gently closing it behind her. The click of the door echoed in his ears. That silence, the silence from someone he had begun to see as so much more than an adversary, was louder than any scream. And that was only the beginning. Sandra didn't just ignore him. She began to quietly dismantle his world. Meetings were rescheduled without notice. His decisions at work were questioned. Projects fell apart without explanation. Fredrick felt it all slipping through his fingers. Even without proof, he knew it was her. At home, things were no better. Sandra no longer shared meals, no longer acknowledged his presence. When he tried to talk, she responded only with cold, disdainful glances. One night, he found her in the living room reading. She looked peaceful, but he knew it was a trap, a silent one. He sat beside her and tried again. "Sandra," he said, voice trembling. "I know I've done horrible things. I know I hurt you. But please, can we talk? Can we at least try?" Sandra slowly closed her book and finally looked at him. Her eyes were like ice. "Talk," she repeated, with a bitter laugh. "You think there's something left to say?" Fredrick swallowed hard, guilt rising like a lump in his throat. "You want to explain yourself now, Fredrick? After everything you've done?" Sandra rose from her seat, turning to face him fully. Her eyes blazed with pain, her voice cutting like glass. "Words," she scoffed. "Words mean nothing to me anymore." She took a step closer, her tone cold but trembling with emotion. "Save your speeches. They won't undo the damage. They won't bring my dad back." "I was wrong, Sandra," Fredrick Spoon said, rising from the couch, his voice shaking with desperation as he took a step toward her. "I know that now. I'll do anything to fix what I've done. I can change. I swear." Sandra finally looked at him. Her gaze was sharp and piercing, like she was testing whether he truly meant the words he was saying. "Change," she repeated, slowly rising to her feet. "Do you really think that changing now will erase everything? Will it bring my father back? Will it undo the years of misery we endured because of you?" Fredrick said nothing. Her words landed like blows. "No, Fredrick. It won't." She stepped closer, and the force of her presence made Fredrick feel like he was shrinking. Her eyes held no sympathy. "What you do now, it's not for me. It's for you. You'll carry this weight, this guilt, for the rest of your life." Fredrick stood in silence, the weight of her words crushing him. For the first time, he understood. There would be no quick redemption. No easy forgiveness. He had hoped to fight for something he thought could still be repaired, but Sandra was beyond simple repair. In the days that followed, Sandra began to escalate her quiet, deliberate punishments. Fredrick was met with cold stares and passive disdain. Every step he took, he felt her quiet contempt burning behind him. He tried again and again to prove he was changing, that he wanted to be better, but his efforts were dismissed, met with sarcasm or complete indifference. One night, after a disastrous work meeting, an important project sabotaged, Fredrick returned home, exhausted and on edge. He found Sandra on the phone, laughing. He paused in the hallway, overhearing pieces of her conversation. She was talking about his decisions at work, and he realized it was her. Sandra was the one dismantling everything.
Carefully.
Subtly, in a way only he could notice. When she hung up the phone, Fredrick was waiting in the living room, his expression a mix of exhaustion and restrained fury. "You're tearing everything apart," he said quietly, frustrated in every word. "At work. Here. You're destroying my life." Sandra crossed her arms, face calm. "Destroying your life?" she repeated. "I'm only giving back what you gave me." She took a step closer. "Don't worry, Fredrick. I won't ruin you financially. That would be too easy. I want you to live with the pain. I want you to feel every small loss like I did. I want you to watch everything you built crumble and know it's your fault." Fredrick felt the floor give way beneath him. It was a nightmare, one he couldn't escape. He had always been the winner, the one in control. But now, he was the victim of a slow, calculated revenge. Sandra wasn't trying to destroy him overnight. She wanted him to unravel.
Piece by piece.
And it was working. Weeks passed. Fredrick, once confident and arrogant, now wandered the house like a ghost, chasing a forgiveness he knew might never come. Every effort he made to redeem himself fell flat. He was stuck in a cycle of guilt and regret, and Sandra held the reins. But the worst moment came one cold night when Sandra finally confronted him with a chilling calm he had never seen before. She walked up to him as he sat slouched on the couch, broken and drained. Her voice was composed, but her words were blades. "Fredrick," she began, You took something from me I can never get back. She paused. Let that truth settle. Now I'm returning the favor, and you'll live with that for the rest of your life. She didn't wait for a reply. She walked away, leaving him with nothing but the sound of silence and a truth he couldn't deny. Fredrick Spoon was trapped, in guilt, in shame, in helplessness. He was no longer the man who believed he could control everyone and everything. Now he was hollow, a pale reflection of the person he used to be. Every time he tried to speak to Sandra, she shut him out. Cold stares, silent rejection. Her indifference gnawed at him more than anger ever could. He couldn't sleep, couldn't think of anything except how to fix what he had broken. But nothing he tried was enough. Then, something inside him began to shift. Fredrick realized that words meant nothing anymore. Apologies were useless. If he wanted to prove he had changed, it had to be through action, genuine, selfless action. One morning, he woke up with a new resolve. He wouldn't beg anymore. He wouldn't push. Instead, he would give Sandra space. But he would still be present, in quiet, respectful ways. He started noticing the small things about her. She loved peonies. Her coffee strong, no sugar. She liked silence in the morning. He didn't follow her or invade her space, but he paid attention. That afternoon, Fredrick went to one of the city's best florists. He bought a bouquet of peonies, but didn't give them to her directly. Instead, he left them on the kitchen table. No note, no expectations, just a quiet offering. When Sandra returned from her walk, she saw the flowers. She didn't say anything, but Fredrick, watching from a distance, saw her pause. She picked one up, smelled it. Her face didn't change, but she didn't throw them away either. It was a tiny moment, but to Fredrick, it was a start. In the following days, he continued his quiet efforts. He made her coffee in the mornings, just the way she liked it, and left the house before she came downstairs. He began placing her favorite snacks in the cupboard, organizing the kitchen the way she preferred. No words, no confrontation, just small, meaningful signs that he was paying attention. Still, Sandra kept her wall up. She was guarded, distant, but Fredrick was patient. He knew healing would take time, and this time, it had to be on her terms. Then one especially cold evening, something shifted. Sandra stood on the balcony, wrapped in a blanket, watching the city lights. Fredrick hesitated, then quietly walked up with a cup of hot tea. "I thought you might like something warm," he said softly, careful not to push. Sandra didn't say anything at first. She quietly accepted the cup of tea, her eyes still fixed on the city skyline. Fredrick stood beside her, silent, just trying to be present without intruding. The tension in the air was undeniable, but for the first time in weeks, it didn't feel unbearable. Something was shifting between them, even if only slightly. "Why are you doing this, Fredrick?" Sandra finally broke the silence, her voice soft but steady. Fredrick knew this was his moment, his chance to speak truthfully. He inhaled deeply before answering, keeping his gaze on the distant horizon. "Because I realized that words don't mean anything anymore," he said quietly. "Apologies won't fix what I did. But I'm trying to show you I'm changing. I want to be better, not just for you, but because I finally understand that I need to be." Sandra remained silent for a few more seconds, still holding the warm cup between her hands as a cold breeze swept past them. But the heaviness between them seemed to ease just a bit. "You can't change the past, Fredrick," she said, her voice softer than he expected. "I know," he replied sincerely, "but I can change the future." For the first time that night, Sandra turned to look at him. Fredrick saw something different in her eyes. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a flicker of curiosity. The wall between them was still there, but maybe now there was a small crack in it. He knew she wasn't ready to let him back in completely, but this was a start. She was beginning to believe that maybe he meant it. In the days that followed, Fredrick stayed consistent in his small gestures. Something in the energy between them had shifted. Sandra still kept her distance, but she no longer rejected him outright. She accepted the flowers. She took the tea. She even allowed short, casual conversations during breakfast. The interactions were brief and surface level, but the hostility was softening. Slowly, piece by piece, the barriers were coming down. Then came the real turning point. One evening, Fredrick was dressed up, about to leave for a business meeting, when Sandra walked into the room with an unreadable expression. "Can you cancel your meeting?" she asked, out of nowhere. Fredrick froze. She had never asked about his whereabouts since things had fallen apart between them. For a second, he hesitated, but then, without questioning, he reached for his phone and canceled the meeting. It was the first time in weeks Sandra had shown any desire to spend time with him, and he wasn't going to miss that chance. They sat on the couch, not touching, a small space between them, but the silence didn't feel uncomfortable anymore. Sandra looked pensive, as if sorting through months of emotion in her mind. "I'm not ready to fully forgive you," she said finally, breaking the quiet. "But you're showing me something different. I see you're trying. And maybe that's the beginning of something." Fredrick's heart pounded. He knew better than to rush. But Sandra's words gave him hope. The road to redemption was long, but she had just given him a reason to keep walking it. That night, they spoke about mundane things, music, old movies, memories from before everything collapsed. For Fredrick, it was a quiet victory. Sandra no longer felt unreachable. She was letting him in slowly, and this time he would not mess it up. Still, something lingered in the air. A shadow. Fredrick sensed it. There was something Sandra hadn't told him yet. A deeper pain. A truth buried beneath the surface. He didn't push. He waited. And then, one rainy night, as droplets tapped softly against the penthouse windows, Fredrick saw it in her again. That distance. That silence. Something in her eyes told him she was far away, lost in thought. He tried to stay calm, not pressure her, but the uncertainty gnawed at him. Finally, unable to hold back, Fredrick broke the silence. "Sandra," he began, his voice low, careful. "I know there's still something between us, something you haven't told me. I can feel it." He looked at her, searching her eyes. "Please, if there's something you're still carrying, I need to know." Sandra sat on the couch, hands folded tightly in her lap. She didn't respond right away. The silence stretched long, and Fredrick could feel his heart racing. But he waited. He had learned that much. At last, she looked at him. Her eyes were heavy with emotion, pain, sorrow, and something else. Resolve. "You're right," she said, her voice trembling. "I've been holding something back. Something I didn't think I could ever tell you. But maybe it's time." Fredrick felt the world tighten around him. Whatever she was about to say, he knew it would change everything. Sandra took a deep breath. "Do you remember the company you destroyed? The one my father managed?" she asked, her voice flat but her eyes full of pain. "I told you it ruined my family." "That was true. But it wasn't everything you destroyed." Fredrick's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" he asked gently. Sandra looked down, fighting tears. "I was pregnant, Fredrick." The words hit him like a brick wall. He blinked, stunned. "What?" he whispered. "I was pregnant when it all happened," she continued, her voice barely audible. "When you destroyed everything. When my father lost everything. The stress, the shame, the collapse of our entire world. I lost the baby." Fredrick couldn't breathe. His chest tightened as if the weight of what he'd done had finally landed in full. It wasn't just a company he had destroyed, not just a family. It had been a life. "Sandra," he tried, but the words caught in his throat. "I know you didn't know," she said through the tears now falling freely. "Because you never cared to look. You never cared to ask. You bulldozed lives, Fredrick, and you didn't even see the people in your way." Fredrick looked at her, devastated, speechless. And for once in his life, there was nothing he could say. "I lost my baby, and you went on with your life as if nothing had happened." Her words sliced through Fredrick Spoon like knives. He opened his mouth, wanting to say something, anything that could undo the past, but nothing came. There were no words strong enough to erase what Sandra Richards had endured. I don't have the words," Fredrick finally managed, his voice hoarse, hollow. What I did, it's unforgivable. I'll never forgive myself for it. But please, Sandra, I would do anything, to try and make this right. Sandra's gaze didn't leave his. She studied him, her expression unreadable. The silence was suffocating, and Fredrick knew that no apology could bring back the child they'd lost. Still, he was desperate to ease even a fraction of the pain he had caused. Finally, Sandra took a deep breath and closed her eyes. When she opened them again, something had shifted. The pain was still etched in her features, but behind it was something else. Something Fredrick couldn't yet name. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Fredrick, she said quietly, her voice heavy with emotion. What happened, what you did, that broke me. She paused, then added, but I can see that you're trying. And maybe there's a chance that someday I can find a way to move forward. But it won't be easy. It won't be quick. Fredrick nodded slowly, his heart a battlefield of hope and regret. I'll do whatever it takes, he said, voice trembling with determination. No matter how long it takes, I'll prove to you that I've changed. That I can be someone you can trust, someone you can maybe one day forgive. Sandra gave him a long, searching look. For the first time, the wall she'd built around herself seemed to have a small crack. We'll see, she whispered. We'll see if you can. She stood and walked toward the door, leaving Fredrick alone on the couch. But this time, the emptiness didn't feel quite so hopeless. There was something new in the air, something fragile, but real. Possibility. The days that followed Sandra's revelation changed Fredrick. Her words haunted him, echoing in the quiet moments. I lost my baby. But instead of sinking into self-pity, he used the guilt as fuel. He made a decision. He would not be the man who destroyed lives without looking back. He began reaching out to those whose businesses he had crushed, starting with the family of an old competitor. He showed up unannounced, knocking on the door of a modest home far removed from the luxury he once flaunted. I'm Fredrick Spoon, he said simply, standing in front of a man whose life he had derailed years ago. I came to apologize. The man stared, stunned. Apologize, he scoffed. What's that going to change now? I can't change the past, Fredrick replied, voice steady. But I can help rebuild the future. Over the next few weeks, he visited more families, offering compensation, support, and something rarer, humility. He donated to small businesses, set up recovery funds, and began volunteering his time. He didn't just write checks, he showed up. Sandra watched it all from a distance. She was skeptical at first, guarded. But as the days passed, her feelings began to shift. Fredrick wasn't just saying the right things, he was doing them. And slowly, respect returned. Then admiration. One evening, Sandra stood on the balcony, watching the city lights. Fredrick joined her silently, fresh from another reconciliation visit. His posture was different now, more grounded, more human. How is it today? She asked without turning. Tough, he admitted, his voice low. But necessary. Every conversation, every apology, it's another step forward.
Not just for you, Sandra.
For me too. She turned to face him. Something in her expression had softened. The bitterness was fading, replaced by quiet strength. I can see that, she said. And I want you to know, I'm ready to try. Maybe it's time to leave the past behind. Maybe it's time to build something new. Relief surged through Fredrick, stronger than anything he'd ever felt. She was giving them a chance, not as a couple thrown together by a contract, but as two people choosing each other. As the 6-month marriage agreement neared its end, something unexpected happened. Sandra and Fredrick began to reconnect, not just out of obligation, but genuine affection. Their conversations grew warmer, laughter returned, and love began to bloom. One night, Fredrick prepared a quiet dinner. As they sat across from each other, he took a deep breath. Sandra, he said, nervous but sincere, I know our agreement is almost over, but I don't want this to end. I don't want us to end. I've fallen in love with you, truly. And I want to continue this as a real couple. No games. No contracts. Just love. Sandra blinked, surprised, but her heart was already miles ahead. I love you too, Fredrick, she said softly. And I want to try. As equals. As a real couple. Months later, Sandra began feeling different. Morning nausea, fatigue, signs she couldn't ignore. A checkup confirmed what she suspected. She was pregnant. When she told Fredrick, his reaction was pure joy. He held her tightly, tears in his eyes. I want to do this right, he whispered. I want to marry you again, this time for real. Not for a deal. Not for a show. Just love. Sandra smiled, her own eyes glistening. Yes, Fredrick. This time, let's do it for us. Their second wedding was quiet, intimate, just close friends and family. No flash. No pressure. Just a celebration of love, redemption, and new beginnings. Fredrick knew the road wasn't over. He still had much to prove, to Sandra, to himself, and to those he had wronged. But now he had a reason to keep going. The woman he loved, and the child they were expecting. As they swayed together at the end of the ceremony, Sandra leaned her head on his chest and whispered, "Who would have thought it all started with a bet?" Fredrick chuckled, holding her closer. "Best bet I ever made." What do you think? Did Sandra make the right choice in forgiving and marrying Fredrick? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more emotional stories like this. Thank you for watching.